You were never told this, but you feel it in your bones. That quiet ache, that pull towards something or someone who makes you forget yourself. Not in a poetic way, in a self-erasing, identity-shattering way. You love her more than you love your own life. You'd take the fall. You'd burn it all. And you think that makes you noble. But what if it makes you lost? The modern man doesn't know who he is, because he was never taught how to suffer with purpose. He was told to be nice, to be soft, to be agreeable. He was trained silently to believe that if he just sacrificed enough, he would finally be loved. That love would save him. But that's not love. That's self-extinction masquerading as virtue. Watch how it plays out. A man meets a woman. He gives everything. Not because she asked, but because he's starving to be seen. He lets her define the terms of his masculinity. He bends around her moods. He contorts around her chaos. Not out of strength, but out of a desperation to feel whole. That's the modern dynamic. And it's not romance. It's worship. And worship always requires a sacrifice. Most men, especially in their 20s and 30s, walk around with a mask, not of confidence but of false humility. They believe that love demands their total surrender. They think being a good man means absorbing pain in silence, without asking for anything in return. But this isn't goodness. It's guilt. It's a soul looking for redemption in the wrong temple. And the temple is usually a woman. It's not that women are the enemy. No, that's a child's interpretation. But when the feminine is not respected as chaos, when it is idolized instead of balanced, it becomes destructive to both her and him. She was never supposed to complete him. She was never supposed to fix what his absent father broke. She was never designed to carry the emotional burden of a man who doesn't know where he stands. That's not love. That's transference. A man who does not know who he is will define himself through how much pain he can endure in a relationship. He will mistake submission for strength. He will confuse neglect for loyalty. And worse, he will convince himself he is being honorable, because it feels noble to bleed for someone else. It feels virtuous to carry her pain. It feels like meaning, but meaning is not found in masochism. There is no virtue in being emotionally erased. She wants a man, not a shadow, and she can sense the difference. But when a man places her above his principles, when he betrays his own boundaries just to keep her, he becomes a child again, a boy in the body of a man, begging for the emotional approval of the first woman who ever held him, his mother. This is where modern love collapses, not in the absence of passion, but in the absence of hierarchy. There is no order when the feminine becomes the throne and the masculine kneels, and he doesn't even know he's doing it. It's unconscious. That's what makes it tragic, because he's not trying to manipulate. He's not trying to dominate. He's trying to be chosen. That's all. But in trying to be chosen, he forgets to choose himself. You feel it, don't you? That subtle ache, that slow erosion of your center, when you don't speak your truth because you're afraid she'll leave, when you agree just to keep the peace, when you tell yourself, if I just stay calm, maybe she'll love me better. That is the path toward personal extinction. And it ends in bitterness, not intimacy, because a woman does not want a man who betrays himself. Not truly. She may say she wants sensitivity, softness, and passivity, but what she needs is strength. Quiet, principled, grounded strength. Not aggression, not control, but a spine. A man who can look at her in the storm of her own chaos and say, no, I will not lose myself here. But you don't get there by accident. You get there by facing the part of you that wants to disappear. That secretly believes if I suffer enough, maybe I'll matter. No, you matter because you carry the burden rightly, not because you vanish beneath it. But how did we get here? To a place where so many men equate devotion with disappearance? Where love is no longer a partnership but a personal crucifixion? The answer is deeper than culture. It's psychological, and it begins with fatherlessness. Whether literal or symbolic, most modern men were not initiated. They were not guided by someone who looked them in the eye and said, this is who you must become. Instead, they grew up in homes where the masculine was absent, weak, or shamed. The father, if he was present at all, was either emotionally distant or spiritually neutered. And in that vacuum, the boy learned to adapt. He became emotionally compliant. He found safety in appeasement. He turned down his fire. Why? Because a boy without a father doesn't stop needing structure. He just finds it elsewhere. And more often than not, he finds it in women. That's where the worship begins. Not out of lust, but out of longing. He doesn't crave her body as much as her order. He doesn't desire her love as much as he desires her validation. And that's the tragedy. Because no woman can give a man what only his father was meant to bestow. Identity. Boundaries, weight, and when she tries, it always collapses. Not because she's wrong, but because he's misplaced his center. She cannot be his ground. She cannot be his guide. She can be his partner, but only if he is already whole. Only if he has faced his pain and turned it into structure. Only if he has suffered voluntarily, rather than passively absorbing the chaos around him and calling it love. You see, real love, transformative love, begins when a man is no longer afraid to disappoint her for the sake of his principles. When he can say, "No, I will not give you this piece of myself," and still remain tender. That kind of man is not cold, he is disciplined. That kind of man is not detached, he is rooted. And that is the man she respects. But that man must go through hell first. The hell of identity loss, of carrying burdens he was never meant to carry, of loving too much, too fast, too blindly, of choosing her feelings over his own integrity, of betraying himself in the name of harmony, only to wake up one day and find himself hollow. That hollowing is a death, a quiet, slow, socially approved death. No one talks about it, because on the surface he's doing the right thing. He's being nice. He's keeping the relationship together. He's being emotionally available. But inside he knows the truth. He is vanishing, and that vanishing breeds resentment. It starts subtly. He smiles less. He avoids eye contact. He distracts himself with work, with porn, with distractions. He stops bringing his full presence to the relationship, not because he stopped loving her, but because he stopped loving himself, and she became the only identity he had left. This is the destruction of male identity in modern relationships, self-erasure, masquerading as love. And here's the hardest truth you'll ever hear. She doesn't want that version of you. She may think she does. She may even tell you she does. But deep in her feminine soul, she wants a man who can say no. A man who can lead. A man who can hold her chaos without being swallowed by it. Not because he's immune, but because he's disciplined. Because he has something higher guiding him. You do not become that man by appeasing. You become him by facing the parts of yourself that would rather be liked than respected. That would rather be desired than known. That would rather be safe than whole. And you kill them one by one. Not with violence, but with principle. You stare down your tendency to overgive, to over-apologize, to over-empathize, and you replace it with clarity. Not cruelty, clarity. Because clarity is the beginning of order. And without order, there is only chaos. Chaos is not inherently evil, but it is dangerous. Especially when a man enters it unprepared. The feminine, psychologically, archetypally, is the domain of chaos. That doesn't mean women are chaotic in a derogatory sense. It means they embody what is unpredictable, emotional, creative, and life-giving. But chaos, when not balanced by a strong masculine structure, does not give life, it consumes it. And this is where so many men go wrong. They enter the relationship hoping for completion, not balance. They crave emotional intimacy. But they don't carry the internal frame strong enough to withstand the emotional intensity of the feminine. So what happens? She tests him. Not maliciously, but biologically, spiritually, unconsciously. She throws storms his way, mood swings, insecurities, contradictions, not to punish him, but to see, can you hold me? Can you hold this without breaking? Most men crumble. They either retreat into passivity, nodding, apologizing, yielding at every moment of tension, or they explode in anger, revealing that their niceness was always conditional. Neither response is masculine. Neither is strong. One is cowardice. The other is weakness disguised as strength. True masculinity, the kind Jordan Peterson speaks of, the kind that built civilizations and preserved order through fire and trial, is quiet. It is ordered. It is voluntary suffering in the face of chaos. And that means standing firm, not just in moments of external threat, but in the emotional warfare of intimate relationship. Because a relationship in its rawest form is not just comfort. It is a confrontation with your own psychological edges. She will bring you face to face with your deepest inadequacies. She will not do this to hurt you. She will do this because intimacy demands truth, and truth exposes weakness. The modern man, uninitiated and undisciplined, mistakes this exposure for rejection. He thinks, if she's upset, I must be failing. So he doubles down on self-sacrifice. He gives more. He speaks less. He waits to be chosen. But what he doesn't see is that he's slowly teaching her to lose respect for him. Not because she's cruel, but because he refuses to lead. A woman may crave emotional connection, but she respects psychological sovereignty. She needs a man who can say, I hear you, I care for you, but I will not betray what I know is right, not even for your approval. That man becomes the stable point around which her chaos can dance. He becomes the container, the frame, the spine. Without that, the relationship becomes inverted. She becomes the center. He becomes the satellite. She leads emotionally. He follows desperately. And then both feel resentful. She resents him for not being strong. He resents her for not being soft. But neither sees that the problem was never emotional incompatibility. It was spiritual misalignment. This is not abstract theory. This is playing out in real time, across millions of relationships. You see it in the divorces, in the affairs, in the quiet unhappiness of couples who seem perfect on Instagram but don't speak to each other at dinner. You see it in the man who avoids conflict at all costs, only to explode one day and ruin everything. You see it in the woman who says, he's nice, but I don't feel anything anymore. Why? Because niceness is not a masculine virtue. Strength is. Principle is. Boundaries are. And when a man loses himself in a woman, he is not loving her. He is idolizing her. Idolatry always ends in collapse, because no human being, no matter how beautiful, nurturing, or intelligent, can carry the weight of someone else's identity. She cannot be his God. She cannot be his direction. She cannot save him from himself. Only he can do that. And it begins when he stops asking, what does she need from me? And starts asking, who must I become regardless of her approval? That is the pivot point. That is where the boy dies and the man begins, not in defiance of the feminine, but in right relation to it. The death of the boy is not a metaphor. It is a psychological necessity. The boy lives to please. He seeks permission. He trades authenticity for acceptance. He is terrified of rejection because rejection feels like annihilation. And so when the woman becomes displeased, the boy scrambles. He apologizes before understanding. He agrees before thinking. He sacrifices before being asked. Not out of strength, but out of fear. This fear is not random. It is ancient. It is rooted in years, sometimes decades, of emotional malnourishment. The absence of a strong father figure. The overexposure to feminine moods without masculine guidance. The cultural demonization of assertiveness. And most of all, the lack of male suffering that leads to meaning. Not abuse, not chaos, discipline, voluntary hardship that gives a man shape. Without this, the boy remains soft, not physically as psychologically. He becomes incapable of saying no, not because he lacks the vocabulary, but because he lacks the internal spine. And this is where many men remain trapped, stuck in relationships they don't lead, silenced by guilt they don't understand, desperate for love they've never earned through integrity. Because love, real love, is not given. It is drawn out by presence, and presence requires pain. The man who has not suffered with purpose, who has not chosen responsibility over comfort, cannot be present. Not truly. He can be attentive. He can be affectionate. He can be emotionally expressive. But when the chaos comes, he will collapse. He will retreat into old patterns. He will beg instead of lead. He will yield instead of contain. And in doing so, he teaches her that he is not yet a man. She may never say it, but she will feel it. And in time, she will test him harder. This is the psychological loop so many men live inside, unconsciously attracting chaos. They are not yet strong enough to withstand, and then blaming the woman for being too emotional. But the feminine is not the problem. Your unpreparedness is. You were not taught to suffer voluntarily. You were taught to avoid pain, to stay safe, to appease authority. And so when a woman brings you into her emotional world, a place of fluidity, contradiction power, you panic. You try to fix it, or you shut it down. Or worse, you absorb it thinking you're being empathetic. That is not empathy. That is boundarylessness. Empathy has limits. Boundaries are the frame within which love can actually grow. A woman does not need you to feel what she feels. She needs you to witness it without being swallowed. She needs you to remain conscious when she loses control. She needs you to be grounded when her emotions become wind and fire. And to do that, you must stop loving her more than yourself. You must begin loving yourself in a way that is not narcissistic, but noble. A disciplined love, a structured love, a love that says, I know who I am. I know what I stand for. I know how far I will go and no further. That kind of self-love is rare, because it requires inner confrontation. You must face your desire to be needed. You must kill your addiction to her approval. You must confront the possibility that she may not choose you once you start standing upright. But here's the truth. If you must stay small to be loved, then you are not being loved. You are being tolerated. And you were not built for tolerance. You were built to carry weight, to stand for something, to walk through fire with clarity, not just for her, but for yourself, for the kind of man you are becoming. So what do? You stop apologizing for your convictions. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop worshiping the feminine and start engaging with it as a force to be respected, not feared. You reintroduce order into your world. You wake up earlier. You lift heavier. You speak slower. You think deeper. You become less reactive. You return to the things that give you form: ritual, discipline, silence, solitude. You stop trying to be seen and start becoming someone who sees clearly. Because once you see clearly, you will no longer ask, does she still love me? You will ask, am I being a man worthy of love? And that is when everything changes. When a man becomes worthy of love, not by charm, not by sacrifice, but by principled strength, the entire relationship transforms. She no longer holds emotional power over him. Not because he shuts her out, but because he no longer fears her storms. He doesn't brace himself at every shift in mood. He doesn't scramble to fix things that aren't his to fix. He listens. He discerns. He acts when it is right, and he is still when it is not. That is the fruit of inner structure. And make no mistake, she notices. Even if she fights it, even if she pushes back, something in her begins to trust. Not the man who bends, but the man who stands. And make no mistake, she notices. Even if she fights it, even if she pushes back, something in her begins to trust. Not the man who bends, but the man who stands. Because when a man can remain unmoved in the face of emotional chaos, not distant, but present and firm, he becomes something the modern world has forgotten: a source of safety. Not the kind of safety that avoids conflict, the kind that brings peace through clarity, through authority, through the refusal to abandon his own integrity, even for love. This is the masculine ideal, not dominance but stability. Not control, but leadership. And it is earned, not through grand gestures or emotional confession, but through daily choices, small decisions to act rightly when it would be easier to collapse, to speak truth when it would be easier to remain silent, to maintain frame when everything inside you wants to flee. Because the man without discipline is already lost. Discipline is not just a habit, it is the skeletal system of your soul. It gives form to your desires. It guards you against your own weakness. It prepares you for responsibility. And responsibility is what makes you a man. The more responsibility you can carry, the more capable you become. Not just in the world, but in love. Women feel this deeply. They may not articulate it in psychological terms, but they know almost instinctively when a man is carrying weight, and when he is using them to avoid his own. And when a woman realizes she is being used as a substitute for discipline, for identity, for meaning, the respect begins to erode, slowly, quietly, but it erodes. She may still care, she may still try, but she cannot give a man the respect he will not earn. And this is what most men don't understand. They think the loss of respect happens because they didn't give enough, didn't try hard enough, didn't love deeply enough. But the loss didn't come from a lack of effort. It came from the absence of inner order. He loved her more than himself, and in doing so, taught her that he was unworthy of being loved in return. The man she wanted was not the one who gave up his identity for her. It was the one who refused to give it up at all. But to become that man, you must be willing to suffer. Not from her, but from yourself. You must face your cravings for validation, your fear of being alone, your desire to be emotionally coddled. You must deny the part of you that wants her to mother you. and choose, instead to father yourself. That means building, brick by brick, day by day, waking up before you want to, saying no when it would be easier to say yes, speaking truth, even when it risks the relationship, choosing long-term meaning over short-term harmony. Because a man who lives only for peace will never know power. There will be conflict. She will cry. She may call you harsh, but if you hold your frame, with love, with calm, with unwavering principle, she will feel something deeper than comfort. She will feel reverence, because she will see what the world no longer shows her: a man who refuses to collapse, a man who stands upright, in the fire, in the silence, in the tension, not to dominate, not to win, but because it is right. Because without that uprightness, you are not a partner. You are a passenger, and she was never meant to steer. There is no salvation in submission, not the kind that betrays the self. The world has lied to you. It told you that love means compromise, that devotion means surrender, that being in touch with your emotions means letting go of your masculine edge. It told you to soften, to yield, to become more emotionally available, more empathetic, more open. But no one told you where the line is. No one told you when empathy becomes self-erasure. No one warned you that without structure, softness turns into collapse. You cannot give what you do not possess. And if you have no identity, no core, no guiding ethos, no self-respect, then your love becomes a mask. A desperate, anxious attempt to be seen. And the tragedy is, you may never realize that until you've given so much of yourself away that nothing remains. But it doesn't have to end there. You can reclaim your ground. You can rebuild the structure you were never given. You can become the man who loves, not by losing himself, but by embodying truth in the face of emotional temptation. You can step back from the edge, look in the mirror, and say, I will not betray myself to be loved. I will become a man worthy of being chosen. That path is not easy. It is the hardest path there is, because it requires renouncing comfort, requires you to be hated for a time, misunderstood. It requires you to walk away from people who love the weak version of you, the compliant, agreeable, passive version, and wait for the world to respect the man you are becoming. And that waiting is suffering. But suffering with purpose is what redeems the masculine soul. Every man must suffer. The only question is whether that suffering will be voluntary or imposed. You can suffer now, through self-discipline, responsibility, and restraint, or you will suffer later, through regret, loss, and collapse. There is no third option. The world is desperate for men who can carry the weight without collapsing, who can love fiercely but remain centered, who can walk into feminine chaos not to escape themselves, but to bring order to it. Men who speak truth without rage, who set boundaries without fear, who lead not by dominance but by moral clarity. This is what the feminine is starving for. This is what the modern world no longer trains, but you can become it. And when you do, the woman in your life, if she is truly feminine, will feel something ancient. She will feel her own chaos quiet. She will trust. She will soften, not because you forced her, but because you gave her something to lean on, something stable, something immovable. But make no mistake, she is not your reward. She is not your destination. Your reward is who you become in the process. A man who does not vanish in love. A man who does not bend to chaos. A man who chooses responsibility over comfort, clarity over pleasure, and truth over approval. A man who stands upright does not need to shout.